My fellow bad guys, I, Lex Luthor, your leader, will speak now about my, Lex Luthor's plan. My villainous plan. Question the plan at your peril.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. We've got further Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. We have further confirmation today that, if you work at Disney or maybe Marvel Studios or Lucasfilm, you do not operate like in a business sense like you do anywhere else in the world. It doesn't matter how successful you are. It doesn't matter how well you know the product. Like you know what's important and what they stand for and like the history behind the things. It only matters if you can, push representation, maybe toe the party line, because you're essentially living in an alternate universe. We got this once again confirmed today as Victoria Alonso, Marvel Studios exec, has been promoted. And she famously essentially knew nothing about the second most important franchise at Marvel, which they had just reacquired from Fox when they did the Fox acquisition. Now, when you think about it, X-Men at Marvel, like comics, yes, it is the second most important franchise. But in the big scheme of things, of the things they actually own, it's actually the most important because Spider-Man's over at Sony still. They have an agreement to co-produce and stuff like that, but that's still like a Sony thing as far as Spider-Man films. So in theory, X-Men is the most valuable thing that they have, that as far as Marvel Studios, in theory, even more valuable than Avengers potentially. Although within the MCU, the Avengers are king. But when you look at comic book history and their importance and sales and all that stuff, X-Men is sliding directly below Spider-Man as far as importance and as far as awareness, right? Victoria Alonso famously knows absolutely nothing about X-Men. We'll get that here in a second, but it just continues to confirm what you already do. I always feel bad for people when they see these videos, or maybe they see an article. It's like, oh, Kathleen Kennedy's on the way out. It's like, there's no way Kathleen Kennedy's going to be out. It doesn't matter how much you affect the value of like the Star Wars IP to Disney at this point. They're too big to fail anyway. You can destroy the box office revenue. You could kill merchandise sales. You could make the park revenue drop. And it doesn't matter as long as you're pushing what Disney would like you to push. Now, when you talk about Victoria Alonso, she certainly doesn't have the track record of Kathleen Kennedy, obviously, who I was alluding to there with the Star Wars stuff. And she is being promoted to president, physical and post-production, visual effects, and animation production for Marvel Studios. She previously had held the title of executive vice president of production. And she is really an American success story. Really, she hails from Buenos Aires, moved to the U.S. at 19, worked her way up in Hollywood as a personal assistant. Then she was a VFX effects company, Digital Domain, and eventually was a producer, a visual effects producer on Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven, Tim Burton's Big Fish, and Andrew Adamson's Shrek. So we got a couple of, one really, really big hit and a couple of kind of disappointments. But visually, those films were quite fine. Obviously, Victoria Alonso came in and worked with Marvel Studios, got the opportunity on the very first Iron Man. Hey, and I can't say that Victoria Alonso has ever been responsible for a drop in sales or production quality or anything like that. There's nothing in her track record that even suggests that, like what we'll get to with Kathleen Kennedy. And she certainly has the backing of Kevin Feige, president of Marvel Studios, and the chief creative officer of all of Marvel. This is what he had to say about the promotion. Victoria has been an incredible partner and part of our team since the very first Iron Man. She is one of the most dynamic, candid, and accessible executives in the industry. And we're thrilled that she'll continue to be by our side in the elevated role as we lead Marvel Studios into the future. And that is very important because we know Marvel Studios are pushing an agenda into phase 4. We're getting the all new, all different characters. We're getting a lot of gender swaps, things of that nature coming out. But obviously she's been part of a lot of successful productions, but she doesn't know what X-Men is. If you haven't heard this quote, I'll repeat it to you. This is what Victoria Alonso said to nuke the fridge. No, this is so silly. I don't know where the future is going. It's funny that people call it the X-Men. There's a lot of female superheroes in that X-Men group, so I think it's outdated. I'm sorry. I'm sure most of you know this, being a comic book channel. The X-Men have had female members of the group since the very first day that the X-Men were created. They had female members of the group, multiple female members of the group during Second Genesis, and I don't think there's ever been an X-Men team that I can remember, maybe shortly here or there, where there haven't been female members of the X-Men team, because the X-Men doesn't stand, for like men. It's like, you can talk about humanity or men. It can actually mean like humans. You remember who was it? We've actually seen a leader of a country. He kind of chastised a woman. She was talking about what did she say? Mankind in a question to Justin Trudeau, and he like chastised her and said, "We prefer people kind here." It's like, how much of a doofus are you? You don't realize that the man in mankind is not a gendered term at that point. It's short for human. And X-Men, it's not gendered. It's just the team name, and it's obvious it's short for human. But you get this ridiculous stuff all the time, and I remember what did we see? We saw didn't we see a bunch of Congress people, instead of saying "amen," they were saying "ah woman" or something stupid like that. It was like, how dumb! Like, how do you get into office when you're this stupid? You don't understand the language that you speak. But that's neither here nor there. Yes, "amen" is a gendered term somehow, in the same sense that X-Men it's not. That's not really what the part of the name is. She continues on. She says, "I don't know where it's going. They just now have joined," obviously talking about the X-Men coming over with the Fox acquisition. They actually have a movie coming out soon, which is under the banner as the last film. So we'll see what time will tell. And there have been the rumors that instead of calling the X-Men, they're going to call them the Mutants. It's absolutely ridiculous. X-Men is one of the most well-known comic franchises and brands in the entire world. The knowledge of X-Men obviously goes much further than just comic book readers or video game players or movie viewers. We've had successful franchises on all those platforms. Yet you're going to throw that away because for some reason you were so unaware of the history of the X-Men that you think now that there's females on the X-Men team, we can't call them the X-Men anymore. We got to call them the X-People or the X-Things or the you can't call them X-Dudes because that would be gendered, wouldn't it? Calling them the X-Dudes. It's ridiculous stuff like this. If you or I, let's say I worked for McDonald's and I went into a boardroom and I was a senior vice president of something. And I said, you know what? Now that we got sesame seed buns on these Big Macs, we got to change the name. We need to, should they be the Sesame Mac? And everyone's going to look at me stupid and be like, there's always been sesame seeds on those buns. Welcome to the party. What are you, dumb? Why don't you know what a Big Mac is? Why don't you know the history of this product that is the signature product of our company that we're selling worldwide? And, everybody knows what the goddamn Big Mac is. And they know that it comes with the sesame seed bun. Why are you so stupid that you don't know that? Why are you such a yo-yo that you don't realize the history of the X-Men includes female characters from day one? Yet this type of knowledge will get you promoted within Marvel Studios. It doesn't matter if you know the product. It doesn't matter how well you know or if you're familiar with or any of the history associated with a team like the X-Men. One of the most profitable, potentially the biggest thing that they can put out there because they don't own Spider-Man. That they could produce in-house without having to co-produce with another company. And you ask, well, why would that be, Wes? Well, she's been on good productions. Well, okay, I'll give you that, but you don't normally promote stupid people, do you? Or people that don't know your product. Perhaps you make them, you're like, hey, man, you need to go read up on this stuff and get a little idea of what we're trying to sell here. I think a lot of it has to do with the last part of what they were talking about earlier in that quote. as we lead Marvel Studios in the future. Like I mentioned earlier, Phase 4 includes a lot of gender swaps. We know Kevin Feige himself specifically said the reason they picked the Eternals and like pushed it to the front of the line as far as brands or teams that they could move forward is because they weren't very well known, and there was a lot of opportunity for gender and race swaps within the characters. And that is important to Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios. So when you hear Victoria Alonso she answered a question about more LGBTQIA representation in the MCU. This was her quote. "It takes time. We have so many stories that we could tell. We will empower those that are. We're not changing anything. We're just showing the world who these people are and who these characters are." And then she continued, "There's a lot that we have coming up that I think will be representative of the world today." Obviously, speaking of Phase 4. But she did like caveat that and gave herself and Marvel Studios a little bit of an out. But she continued, "We're not going to nail it in the first movie, or the second movie, or the third movie, or the first show, or the second show. But we will do our best to consistently try to represent." Basically saying it'll fail quite a few times, but we're gonna keep putting it out there. It doesn't matter, because that is the ethos of Marvel Studios, and certainly Victoria Alonso is firmly behind that. It's weird. I guess she gives different answers for different people. There's another time to another group where she was speaking, and they were asking her about representation. And here we're pushing representation where we're going to fail quite a few times, but we're going to keep pushing it because we know it's important. Another group, I guess, had a different point of view and deserved a different answer. This is what Victoria Alonso said there. Well, so you can look at it from the social point of view, the cultural point of view, which we know that they absolutely are. But truthfully, this is a business. From a fiscal point of view, you're leaving money on the table by not representing. So have you been losing money because of representation, or are you going to fail 4 times because of representation? I guess it all depends on who you're talking to. So that's why this person is an exec and is getting promoted, despite knowing jack shit about the X-Men or one of the marquee IPs that have come over to Marvel Studios and would figure to be very important for the future of the MCU. The Avengers are kind of we are going to see the Avengers again, but they're not what they were. And I don't see people going in droves to watch an Avengers movie without Tony Stark and Captain America. I've been proven wrong before. We shall see. But this is all par for the course. We've seen this with Kathleen Kennedy. I remember you'd always see those videos like Kathleen Kennedy has been like she's been on double secret probation. She's about to be removed. Kathleen Kennedy's out the door in 6 months, and I'm just going, no way. There is not a chance in hell after all the failure that this person has had that Kathleen Kennedy is going out the door. If she was gonna be shown the door, it would have happened already. We're years upon years into this after the acquisition and the first films have come out, and there's been a lot of failure based on what Star Wars is. Not, we're not basing this on a movie like Big Fish or something like that. We're basing it on the expectations of the Star Wars franchise. So recently, Bob Chapek, the new boss over there at Disney, was asked about handing over control of Lucasfilm to Mandalorian co-creators Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. Obviously, Dave Filoni was kind of George Lucas's right-hand guy when it came to actually making the films. Like, he was the guy behind Clone Wars, and he worked side by side with George Lucas multiple times. Jon Favreau was very successful in launching, basically Marvel Studios and in basically bringing some type of hope back to Star Wars fans after the sequel trilogy. And this is what Bob Chapek had to say. "We've been absolutely thrilled that we could have the kind of creative talent in our company, the likes of Kathleen Kennedy, to run Lucasfilm. And we look forward to having Kathy directing the activities of the entire Lucasfilm organization for many years to come. Thank you for your question. Next question, please." She's not going anywhere. It's like, and you look at it, in 2015, we got The Force Awakens launches, $248 million domestic opening. I believe that was the record at the time. Ends up generating $2 billion worldwide. Those were huge numbers. They weren't Avatar numbers, but I believe at that point, maybe it was the second biggest film in the history of the world. I think so. I believe it was number 2. Huge success. Now, obviously, J.J. Abrams had basically just remade Star Wars, The Force Awakens. I'm sorry, not The Force Awakens, but A New Hope. But it did very well. It was well received, although there were a lot of skeptics. I wish I was one of them at the time, but I was eating up. I was like, oh, this must be great. Obviously, we get Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi. 2017 opens up to $220 million opening weekend. Hey, it only dropped off $28 million. So what is that, like 12% maybe? Maybe less than that. There's not a lot of... It wasn't a huge drop, but it was a big drop. It ends up making $1.3 billion total worldwide. So that's essentially a 35% drop total. A 12% drop on opening weekend, 35% drop. And everyone's like, well, the second film in a trilogy always does the worst. Just wait till you see The Rise of Skywalker. And believe you me, the folks at Lucasfilm and Disney were saying, wait till you see The Rise of Skywalker, because they were expecting something like Endgame, which obviously did like $3 billion. They were expecting an enormous box office receipt. And enthusiasm for the end of this first trilogy. They brought back J.J. Abrams, who was, his Force Awakens was far better received than The Last Jedi from Rian Johnson. But at that point, Kathleen Kennedy's leadership, we'd all seen her with the Force is female, and it was quite clear. At this point, almost every Star Wars film other than Solo is being led by a female protagonist. There was clearly an agenda by what she was doing for Star Wars. Apparently, no female had ever liked the Star Wars franchises in the history of the world until Kathleen Kennedy got in charge. Even though I remember as a kid playing Star Wars, and there was all the girls were playing. Everyone loved Star Wars. it was crazy. So they get their big Endgame event, right? The big payoff. The Rise of Skywalker 2019, $176 million opening weekend. Now that's a substantial drop off, and $1 billion total. So it halved from the very first film. It didn't go up. It actually was under the second film, and everyone said the second film always does the worst. The third film is the one that really pops. Well, it didn't pop because at that point, people had lost faith in the franchise and what Kathleen Kennedy's leadership was bringing. And you go, well, it still made money. Of course it did. It made $1 billion. But they didn't spend $4 billion in the acquisition of Lucasfilm to steadily lose money on a sequel trilogy. And not to mention the clusterfuck that was the production issues. J.J. Abrams wasn't supposed to direct or do anything with the last one. It was supposed to be Colin Trevorrow. He had to leave because Rian Johnson had ruined everything, and they wouldn't talk to him, even though he was writing the damn movie. And Rian Johnson decided it would be funny, I guess, to undo everything that J.J. Abrams did in the first film. So they had to bring him back to try and fix it. And I've got a video on it where I'm talking to Aaron Sparrow about that movie. The Rise of Skywalker is one of the biggest clusterfucks you'll ever watch in your life. It's basically him undoing everything that Rian Johnson did while trying to finish the movie at the same time. It's like, what is it? Warp skipping, or whatever they call that? Warp speed skipping, light speed skipping, whatever they call it in the movie. It was that in a movie. It was absolutely unwatchable. Under Kathleen Kennedy's leadership, there was no roadmap. There was no plan for the sequel trilogy. There was production error issues all over the place. She's had to fire so many directors at Lucasfilm at this point. It's unbelievable. Even big name, hot people, like the guys behind Legos. I can't remember the guys behind the Legos movie. She ended up having to get rid of them, bring in Ron Howard. Solo didn't do all that well either. Everything that Kathleen Kennedy essentially has touched at Lucasfilm has gotten worse and worse as far as revenue. The only thing that's really been well received so far is The Mandalorian. And that feels like it was a Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni thing. That's why people were asking, why aren't they taking over? And it's not just the movie, the box office gate receipts. In 2017, 2018, Disney's consumer product sales fell very noticeably, in large part due to Star Wars merchandise declining. The sales on their merchandise went to nothing. No one wants to buy the sequel trilogy characters. In fact, it notoriously kind of put Toys R Us out of business because they had that exclusive deal, right? They had to pay for all this stuff that they couldn't sell. In fact, Disney was so embarrassed by all this. In 2019, they stopped reporting consumer product sales as their own, fiscal accountability thing. They had to roll it into parks, experiences, and products, direct consumer and stuff. So they could mask how much money they were losing and how bad the sales were dropping, despite the incredible popularity of the Avengers at the time. Not only that, you had the rollout of Galaxy's Edge, which was hugely disappointing. This was supposed to be the new main attraction, like at Disney World. And you're like, it's focusing on the sequel trilogy. Everyone hates that thing. Well, last made $1 billion. Yeah, but nobody liked it. Sometimes people go to see the train wreck. It halved the original revenue of the first movie. There was no enthusiasm. The enthusiasm was declining for this thing. You certainly didn't see that for the original trilogy, or even the prequel trilogy. That thing still made money, even though it wasn't all that good. The sequel trilogy made the prequel trilogy look like Citizen Kane or like The Godfather or something. And the prequel trilogy isn't very good. There's some good elements, but for the most part, it's bad filmmaking or bad storytelling. How's that? And so they based the Galaxy's Edge attraction on the sequel trilogy, and then you find out later on it was supposed to be Tatooine. You're supposed to have the Mos Eisley Cantina and all that good stuff. Why would they change that? To lose money? Oh, because Kathleen Kennedy said we need to look forward, not in the past. And the sequel trilogy is the future of Star Wars. No, it's not. There's no future there. Nobody wants to buy the toys. Nobody wanted to see the movies. The enthusiasm was declining. Nobody wants to go to the attraction. Nobody wants to go to Disney World and go to the stupid sequel trilogy stuff. That's all on Kathleen Kennedy. Yet, absolutely, Bob Chapek supports Kathleen. We're going to work with her for years because she pushes the right agenda. We need more. The Force needs to be female. Every lead character in these properties, at least in the movies, needs to be female, unless it's Han Solo, and that's what it is. Because Kathleen Kennedy pushes the right agendas. She's welcome at the table, despite destroying the value of Star Wars and likely losing them. When I say losing, I don't mean they lost this money. I'm talking about revenue that should have been earned that wasn't due to incompetence, billions of dollars. 2 or 3 at least, just off the movies. And who knows what money was lost just as far as the gate receipts for Galaxy's Edge, which we know they could have used because we had the pandemic happen and they had to shut all their parks down, and they probably could have used a couple $1 billion in that war chest while they were losing money. But there's no accountability for these things. If you're Victoria Alonso and you know nothing about the X-Men, you get promoted at Marvel Studios, even though you just require the X-Men, and that's going to be one of your premier IPs in Marvel Studios. If you're Kathleen Kennedy, you could literally cost Disney billions of dollars, and they will still back you because Disney's not here to listen to fans. You could vote with your wallets all you want. Disney's above that at this point. And I don't see it changing. But this is just more confirmation, despite even the backing of Kathleen Kennedy after she's botched everything. Victoria Alonso made a complete ass out of herself, but she says the right thing and she's pushing the right agendas, so she gets a nice promotion, despite not knowing anything about the world she's supposed to be working in. And that's Disney, that's Marvel, that's Lucasfilm, and it's disappointing. So the next time you hear that rumor that Kathleen Kennedy's out the door, believe it when you see it. It's not happening. These morons that watch Justin Trudeau say, "We save people kind here." These are the idiots we're dealing with. They live in a completely different world. In so many ways, shapes, and forms, it's not even funny.